a person whole, lived a young girl named Scarlett, known to the village as Little Red Riding Hood. Her name was fitting, for she was often seen in the crimson cloak her grandmother had sewn for her, a vibrant splash of colour amidst the otherwise grey and haunting woods. The forest that bordered the village was ancient, its trees towering like sentinels of a time long forgotten. It was said that the forest had a life of its own, a deep memory of things best left undisturbed. Despite its beauty, the villagers never ventured deep into the forest. It was a place whispered about in warnings and half-forgotten tales, the kind spoken around flickering hearths during the coldest nights. Creatures of darkness were said to lurk within, ancient beings who feasted not just on flesh, but on the very souls of those foolish enough to stray from the path. They said the woods themselves were alive, watching, waiting for anyone to lose their way. Scarlett, however, with her curious, adventurous spirit, had never taken these warnings seriously. She loved the woods, finding solace in the quiet whisper of the trees and the dappled light that filtered through the leaves. Though the forest had always been mysterious, it had never seemed threatening, until now. One cold autumn day, her mother handed her a basket filled with freshly baked bread, herbs, and a small jar of honey. The air was crisp, the wind carrying with it the earthy scent of decaying leaves. The forest felt different that day, as if something in its depths had shifted, awakened. "Take this to your grandmother," her mother said, her voice laced with unease. "And stay on the main path, Scarlett." Her hand lingered on Scarlett's arm, her grip tightening momentarily. "The forest remembers things we do not. Do not stray." Scarlett laughed off the warning, though something in her mother's eyes made her pause. The fear in her mother's face was palpable, but Scarlett shrugged it off. She had made the journey to her grandmother's cottage many times without incident. What could possibly go wrong this time? The sky was overcast as Scarlett set off, her red cloak billowing behind her. As she walked deeper into the forest, the familiar path underfoot seemed colder, darker than usual. The trees, tall and ancient, seemed to loom over her, their branches twisting into shapes that resembled gnarled fingers reaching toward her. There was a stillness in the air, an unnatural silence. No birds chirped, no squirrels scurried among the fallen leaves. Even the wind seemed to have ceased its usual playful rustling. Scarlett's steps quickened as she felt the forest's eyes upon her. She had been taught to walk briskly in these woods, to never linger, to never stop. But something about the atmosphere gnawed at her, making her heart beat faster. She pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, as if it could shield her from the heavy, suffocating presence that seemed to close in with every step. It wasn't long before she noticed something she had never seen before. A second trail, narrow and almost hidden beneath a thick layer of fallen leaves. It twisted into the denser part of the forest, where the trees grew so close together that they formed an impenetrable wall of shadow. The path was barely visible, as if it hadn't been walked in years. An odd sensation crawled up Scarlett's spine, a whisper in the back of her mind urging her to turn back. But curiosity, always her strongest trait, urged her forward. For the first time, the forest didn't just feel quiet, it felt alive. She could almost hear it breathing around her, like a predator lying in wait. Ignoring her mother's warning, Scarlett hesitated only for a moment before stepping off the main path and onto the faint trail. The air grew colder as she walked, and the silence became oppressive. Not even the soft crunch of leaves beneath her feet could break the eerie stillness. The trees, now impossibly tall and dense, seemed to lean toward her, their branches curling like claws, blotting out what little light remained. The shadows here were thicker, darker, and they seemed to move just beyond the edge of her vision, shifting and writhing like something alive. Scarlett's breath came in shallow gasps as the oppressive silence pressed down on her. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent her heart racing. She was no longer alone. She could feel it, the presence of something watching her, lurking just out of sight. Her instinct screamed at her to turn back, but pride and curiosity propelled her forward. The trees grew closer together, their branches interlocking like skeletal hands. And soon the path became little more than a narrow passageway between walls of shadow. Scarlett stopped, her breath hitching in her throat. Something was wrong. The forest had never felt this hostile before. A low growl echoed from the darkness behind her. Scarlett froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned slowly, her eyes wide, but saw nothing, only trees and the deep, impenetrable shadows that cloaked the forest. The growl came again, louder this time and closer. Panic surged through her veins. She spun around and began to walk faster, her footsteps quickening into a near run. But the forest seemed to close in around her, the shadows stretching toward her like tendrils, blocking her way. The growling followed her, always just out of sight, just beyond the edge of the trees. Scarlett's pulse quickened as she broke into a full sprint, clutching the basket tightly to her chest. The trees blurred around her, their gnarled branches reaching out like claws, as if the forest itself was trying to snare her. The growl came again, louder, closer. No longer a distant threat, but a predator hot on her heels. The narrow trail abruptly ended in a small clearing, and Scarlett skidded to a halt. Her grandmother's cottage stood before her, its windows dark and unwelcoming, the air around it heavy with an eerie stillness. She hadn't realized she'd made it to the cottage. Breathing heavily, she ran to the door and pushed it open with trembling hands. "Grandmother?" Scarlett called out, stepping inside. The cottage was cold, its once familiar warmth replaced by a chill that seeped into her bones. The fire in the hearth had long since died, leaving only cold ashes. Scarlett's breath fogged in the cold air as she set the basket down on the table, her hands shaking. No answer. The silence was deafening, a thick, suffocating blanket that pressed down on her from all sides. Scarlett crept toward the bedroom door, her heart pounding in her chest. The door was slightly ajar, and the darkness within seemed to spill out into the hallway, deeper than it should have been. Her hand trembled as she pushed the door open. Her grandmother lay in bed, facing away from the door, the covers pulled up high over her shoulders. The room was cloaked in shadow, the only light coming from the faint glow of the overcast sky filtering through the window. "Grandmother?" Scarlett's voice wavered. She took a cautious step forward, but something in her screamed to stop. The figure in the bed shifted slightly, letting out a slow, labored breath. "Why do you not turn to greet me?" Scarlett asked, the words catching in her throat. A raspy voice answered from the bed. "Come closer, dear." Scarlett's heart skipped a beat. The voice was wrong. Too deep, too hungry. She took a step back, her eyes darting around the dimly lit room. Something wasn't right. The air felt thick, heavy, with something she couldn't name. "Grandmother, what big eyes you have," Scarlett said cautiously, her voice barely a whisper. The figure in the bed stirred but did not turn. "The better to see you with, my dear," the voice croaked, still facing away. Scarlett's heart raced. "And what big ears you have!" The figure shifted again, this time letting out a low guttural growl. "The better to hear you with, child." Scarlett's blood ran cold. Her voice trembled as she took another step back, her feet faltering. "Grandmother, what sharp teeth you have." This time, the figure slowly turned, revealing a face that was not her grandmother's, but a wolf's. Its eyes gleamed an unnatural yellow in the dim light, and its maw stretched into a horrific grin, exposing rows of jagged, glistening teeth. "The better to eat you with," the wolf snarled, leaping from the bed with terrifying speed. Scarlett screamed and bolted from the room, her heart thundering in her chest. The beast crashed through the door behind her, its snarls echoing through the small cottage as it gave chase. She barely made it to the door when she heard another growl, this one coming from outside. She skidded to a stop, her breath catching in her throat. There, just beyond the threshold, stood another wolf, its eyes gleaming in the shadows. It had been stalking her, waiting for her to reach the cottage. Despair washed over her. She was trapped between two predators, their glowing eyes watching her every move. There was no escape. But then, something strange happened. The first wolf, the one that had chased her from the bedroom, hesitated. It looked between Scarlett and the other wolf outside, its snarl softening. The two wolves locked eyes for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Before Scarlett could react, the first wolf began to shift. Its fur rippled, its bones cracking and reshaping until standing before her was no longer a wolf, but her grandmother. Her face was gaunt, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Run, Scarlett," her grandmother whispered, her voice trembling. "Run, before it's too late." The wolf outside let out a low, menacing growl, and in that instant, Scarlett understood. The forest didn't just hold memories, it held curses, ancient and unbreakable. Her grandmother had been cursed to wear the wolf's skin, a dark secret she had kept hidden for years. Scarlett's mind reeled as she bolted from the cottage, her feet carrying her as fast as they could. The wolf outside gave chase, its breath hot on her heels, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The curse was deeper than she had ever imagined, and now it was hunting her too. As she ran, the trees seemed to close in around her, their shadows growing thicker and darker. She could hear her grandmother's voice echoing through the forest, a warning too late. Scarlett's legs burned as she ran, her lungs gasping for air, each breath feeling like ice in her chest. The growls of the wolf behind her filled the forest, echoing off the towering trees, growing louder with every desperate step she took. The path, once familiar, twisted unnaturally beneath her feet. Her surroundings blurred into a shadowy, indistinct tangle of branches, but she kept running, her only thought to survive. Yet no matter how fast she moved, the wolf was faster, its snarling breath hot and wet on the back of her neck. It felt like death was chasing her, but as she fled, something unsettling began to change within her. At first, it was subtle, her senses sharpening, the details of the forest becoming clearer, more vivid. She could hear the leaves crackle beneath her feet, the distant rustle of creatures hiding in the underbrush, the howl of the wind as it danced through the branches. Every sound was amplified, sharper than she had ever experienced. Her vision too had shifted. The world around her, once clouded by shadows and twilight, was now clearer, as if she could see through the darkness itself. The silhouettes of the trees were no longer vague shapes but defined forms, every knot and twist in their bark suddenly illuminated. She could see the shifting mists that clung low to the ground, and the moonlight that threaded through the canopy above, creating a surreal and almost otherworldly glow. It was as if the forest had come alive in a way it never had before. But then Scarlett realized the truth. The forest wasn't changing. She was. A chill of recognition shot through her body. Her grandmother's final words echoed in her mind, a desperate plea whispered through lips heavy with fear. Run before it's too late. But now Scarlett understood. The curse, the ancient power of the forest, was already seeping into her very bones, twisting her from the inside out. She wasn't just running from the wolves. She was running from herself. The transformation had already begun. Her legs faltered as she stumbled, reaching out instinctively to steady herself against a nearby tree. But when she looked down at her hand, she gasped in horror. Her fingers were no longer her own. Her nails had lengthened, sharpened into claws that gleamed dangerously in the moonlight. Her skin itched, prickling with an unnatural sensation, as though something was writhing just beneath the surface, eager to break free. Scarlett jerked her hand back, her breath coming in ragged bursts. Her mind was spinning, trying to deny what was happening. But the truth was undeniable. Her body, once human, was shifting, becoming something wild, something feral. Her heartbeat, once frantic with fear, now thudded with a new primal rhythm. Her muscles ached as they stretched and expanded, her bones crackling as they reformed, lengthening into something both familiar and terrifying. Behind her, the wolf let out a low snarl but didn't attack. Instead, it circled her, its glowing yellow eyes watching intently, as if waiting for something inevitable. Scarlett's pulse quickened as she realized the beast wasn't hunting her. It was waiting for her to join it. She could feel the change crawling through her body now. Her breath came in shallow, uneven gasps, her chest tight with the effort to keep control. Her vision swam with the clash of human and beast, each battling for dominance. Every inch of her body ached, pulled between the familiar and the foreign. She could feel her bones shifting, her muscles thickening in unnatural ways. There was agony in the transformation, but beneath it, something darker stirred, a primal hunger, ancient and raw. The wolf finally stepped forward, its movements deliberate, almost cautious. Its yellow eyes gleamed with a cruel intelligence, but it didn't lunge. Instead, it stopped just inches away, its nose close enough for Scarlett to feel the heat of its breath. It tilted its head, studying her with something that almost resembled recognition. Scarlett's voice cracked as she gasped out, Why don't you kill me?" The wolf's fur shimmered, rippling in the pale moonlight. Slowly, unnervingly, its form began to change, limbs elongating, fur receding as it morphed into a tall figure, a man with a lean, feral edge. His skin was pale, nearly translucent in the dim light, his features sharp and predatory. But it was his eyes that were the most disturbing. They glowed with the same golden hue of the beast he had just been, a wildness that hadn't fully left him. "You are already one of us," the man said, his voice a mix of human and animal, deep and unnerving. "Why would I kill my own kin?" Scarlett's heart lurched in her chest, her mind reeling. She clutched her sides, trying to hold herself together, her human mind clinging desperately to what was left of her identity. "No, I don't want this," she whispered, her voice hoarse, breaking. "I can't become one of you." But even as she spoke, she knew it was too late. The forest had already decided her fate. The curse, ancient and malevolent, was wrapping itself around her, binding her to the wild. Her transformation was inevitable. There was no escape. The man's lips curled into a smile, cold and cruel. "Your grandmother wasn't the first to fall to the curse, nor will you be the last. The forest claims those who stray too far. You left the path, Scarlett, and now you belong to it." "No!" Scarlett's voice was barely a whisper, lost in the growing storm within her. The forest pull was growing stronger, overwhelming her senses. Deep inside, something primal stirred, clawing its way to the surface. Her thoughts were slipping, becoming jumbled, incoherent. The smell of the forest filled her nostrils. The damp earth, the musk of animals, the sweet tang of blood. It was intoxicating. She stumbled backward, but the man followed, his voice soft and mocking. "You feel it, don't you? The hunger, the power. It's not so terrible, is it?" Scarlett shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. Her body felt foreign, alien, as though it no longer belonged to her. She could feel her teeth sharpening, pressing painfully against her lips. And when she opened her mouth to scream, a guttural growl escaped instead. The sound horrified her. The man's smile widened, his golden eyes gleaming. "It's only a matter of time. Embrace it, Scarlett. It's what you are now." "No!" Scarlett screamed, but the word came out distorted, broken, half growl, half scream. Her body was betraying her, giving in to the ancient curse. Her bones snapped and shifted, her skin prickling as fur sprouted from her flesh. Her vision blurred, tinged with red. She dropped to all fours, her spine contorting as her form reshaped itself into something monstrous. The last remnants of her human mind clung desperately to reality, but the transformation was relentless. Her red cloak, once a symbol of her innocence, tore as her body expanded, her limbs thickening into the powerful form of a wolf. Her nails turned to claws, her face elongating into a snout. The scream she had tried to release dissolved into a savage, primal howl. She was becoming the wolf. The man watched her transformation with a satisfied look, his eyes gleaming with dark pleasure. "Now you understand," he whispered. "This is the fate of all who wander too deep into these woods. The curse binds us to the forest, and now you are bound as well." Scarlett's mind was a chaotic storm of conflicting thoughts and instincts. The human part of her, the part that remembered her family, her life, her grandmother, was slipping away, overwhelmed by the beast that now ruled her body. But amidst the chaos, one thought burned brightly, cutting through the haze. Her grandmother. Her grandmother had fought this. She had resisted the Curse for years, heeding her true nature, protecting Scarlett from the darkness. But now Scarlett was part of it. She would never be free. With a final agonized howl, Scarlett's transformation was complete. She stood on 4 powerful legs, her red cloak tattered and draped over her wolfish form. Her eyes glowed with the same golden light as the man who had once pursued her. He stepped closer, his voice soft and coaxing. "Now you are free, Scarlett. Free to roam the forest as one of us. Free to hunt. Free to feel the power that courses through your veins. But as Scarlett's wolfish eyes met his, something strange flickered deep within her. Beneath the hunger, beneath the rage, there was something else, something deeper. Her grandmother's warning echoed in her mind, faint but clear. The forest remembers things we do not. The man reached out, placing a hand on her furred shoulder. "Come, Scarlett, join us." For a moment, Scarlett felt the pull. The beast within her longed to run with him, to give in to the freedom of the wild. But deep inside her, a spark of humanity remained flickering like a candle in the wind. It whispered to her, reminding her of who she was, of the love her grandmother had shown her. With a low growl, Scarlett lashed out, her claws tearing through the man's flesh. His eyes widened in shock as blood spilled from the deep gashes across his chest. He staggered back, but his smile never wavered. "You can fight it for now," he rasped, his voice weakening. "But the forest never lets go." Scarlett watched as he collapsed to the ground, his body already shifting back into the form of a wolf. The beast within her howled with satisfaction, but Scarlett felt no victory, only emptiness. She had fought him off, but for how long? The forest was silent again, unnervingly so. Scarlett stood in the clearing, her breath heavy, her new form powerful yet terrifying. The trees seemed to watch her, the shadows whispering ancient secrets only the cursed could hear. She was one of them now, a creature of the forest, a wolf bound to the curse and its dark magic. But somewhere deep within, Scarlett swore to herself that she would fight. For her grandmother, for herself. She would not give in completely. Not yet. The forest may have claimed her body, but her soul was not lost. Not yet. And with a final, defiant howl, Scarlett turned and ran into the darkness, the tattered red of her cloak vanishing into the shadows of the cursed woods. The hunt had only just begun. As Scarlett disappeared into the depths of the forest, the woods seemed to sigh in satisfaction, reclaiming yet another soul. There was no happy ending for her, only the endless hunt, trapped in the form of the very creature she had once feared. The forest had won, and the curse would continue, waiting for the next soul to stray too far from the path. But this is not the end. The forest's darkness lingers, and many more twisted tales wait to be told. If you want to hear more eerie stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to Twilight Fables, where happy endings are never guaranteed.